We now come to item number 10 on the agenda, and my apologies to Ports of Auckland people who have been waiting through our quite long but quite important discussion about COVID. I'd like to welcome from Ports of Auckland, Wayne Thompson as the Acting Chief Executive Officer, Vanessa Matakatea, who is the Senior Manager for Safety and Wellbeing, and Jan Dawson, of course, who we had the pleasure of talking to along with Wayne earlier in the week, our new Chair of Ports of Auckland Board. Can I also acknowledge for this item Chris Levitt, who's our Principal Advisor, and I'm going to ask Chris to introduce it, and then I'm going to ask, I guess it might be Jan, first of all, to introduce it, and then there's a slide presentation for us on this. You'll note that items 10 and 11 of the agenda are very similar. They're both on progress towards the implementation of health and safety recommendations, but I've deliberately kept them separate because it's important that the Port can explain its progress in terms of implementing those recommendations, and then we can hear separately from Chasms on its independent review of those recommendations and the progress being made towards implementing them. So, look, just to put the recommendation of receiving the report, and secondly, quite importantly, providing updates quarterly from the Ports of Auckland as part of the quarterly reporting to the CCO Review Committee. I'd like to move that. Deputy Mayor Cashmore, could I get you to second that, please?
Happy to do so, boss.
Yep, so moved and seconded, and I'll just pass to Chris before we have the presentation from Ports of Auckland. Chris Levitt, thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll just very briefly provide some context before the presentation from Ports of Auckland. On the 29th of April, the governing body received a report from Chasms on the independent health and safety review of Ports of Auckland. At that meeting, you asked Ports to provide a progress report on the implementation of the recommendations in that Chasms report in July and October. Ports have provided their October report, which is attached to the report for this item. Overall, Ports have made good progress since the July update, notwithstanding the challenges imposed by the COVID lockdowns, which will be addressed in their presentation. As you've mentioned, staff recommend that after today's update, Port progress through their quarterly reporting to the CCO Oversight Committee. With that said, I will hand over to Wayne, Jan and Vanessa for their presentation.
Thanks, Chris, and welcome to our representatives from the Port. Jan, would you like to introduce it?
Sure, thank you, and good morning, Megoff and councillors. Thank you for this opportunity to report again on our progress on health and safety at the Port. Before we start our presentation, I just wanted to make some introductory comments, and in particular to assure you, as our shareholder, that the Board is fully committed to the outcome of a work environment where all our people go home each day safe, sound and uninjured. An environment where our people look out for each other and are very comfortable and supported to call out unsafe policies, practices or processes. We're making good progress on implementation of the CHANS recommendations and our strategy for health, safety and wellbeing, albeit, as Chris said, somewhat delayed by the Auckland lockdown of now some 10 weeks. However, this is not a sprint. The changes that we need to make are not just process, but they're also cultural, and cultural changes take a lot longer than frameworks and processes. We're on a journey, and the Board is committed to leading and promoting, and yes, demanding that the Port must be a safe workplace. To reinforce this position, the two new directors that have been appointed with the support of the shareholder have clear expertise in governance of health and safety and a direct experience in Port activities. Management clearly understands and supports this priority of the Board, and the actions they've been taking demonstrate this. Wayne and Vanessa will take you through the progress we've made on this very important issue at the Port. If I can just make one final comment and an apology really. I have the Air New Zealand annual shareholder meeting starting at 12 o'clock, And unfortunately, I may need to leave the council meeting at 11:45 if we haven't completed the presentation and the Chan's report. My apologies for this, but it's somewhat unavoidable, I'm sorry. So Wayne, over to you, please.
Thank you, Jan. Just checking everyone can hear me okay.
Yep, that's coming through loud and clear. Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you. Could we just pull up the presentation, please, if that's possible? While we're doing that, I just want to make a few introductory comments. Just confirm what Jan said, that this is a journey. We're pleased with the progress we are making, but please be assured we understand there's still a lot of work to be done, and we're focused on doing that work, especially in regard to building a safety culture. As Jan said, we can do policies and we can do frameworks and we can do work, but at the end of the day, it's the safety culture and the operations on the ground that we're focused on, and that's where ultimate delivery will be. Just want to make a couple of other comments before Vanessa takes us through in a little bit more detail. Pleased to announce that one of the CHASM's recommendation was the head of health and safety report to the CEO. That's been happening in that Vanessa's been reporting to me as interim CEO. But what we will announce to the company next Monday, that we've taken that a step further. Vanessa has accepted a role of General Manager, Safety and Wellbeing. So from Monday we'll be at a GM level and a full member of the exec team. Just want to make the point, we haven't done that just to tick off the recommendation. We've done that because it's the right thing to do, and it also recognises the great work she's doing and the valuable contributions she's making as we're on the safety journey. Well, went on, and it's in the presentation you may not be able to see, we have kicked off a leadership program. This is an area I'm really passionate about. It is a full leadership program. It will run over probably a 3-year period. It involves all our leaders in detailed training, and it's got a focus about levels of leadership, and by that I mean lead self, lead teams, lead leaders of teams, and lead organisation. I think this is a really important component as we work through improving our overall culture, that we put time and effort into leadership training and improving the level of leadership. And it's got a very strong focus on leadership accountability as well. And as part of that program as well, there will be specific safety and wellbeing training developed into that program. That's probably all I've got, Vanessa, if you want to sort of kick in and start talking through in a little bit more detail. Thanks.
Thanks, Wayne. Vanessa, and congratulations on your new appointment.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. And kia ora koutou. Firstly, I hope you're all healthy and well. Just listening in on the demands on each of you through the COVID restrictions that are being applied at the moment. I hope you're all taking care of your own mental health and well-being during that time. So I just want to acknowledge that first. But thank you very much for your contribution in that space. So look, I want to just acknowledge firstly, I can't see the slides on it's still loading on my screen, but I've got the pack open separately so I can still talk to it, but just conscious I can't see what slide you're looking at the moment.
No, that's good, Vanessa. We can see the slide, but if you can tell us when we go to the next slide, so we're on the overview slide, then we can flick the slides over as you direct us. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. So just in terms of that overview, those are the items we're going to go through. We've had our introductions. I've got 2 or 3 slides in relation to progress to date to give you an update on those recommendations and how they're feeding in. Briefly touch on our own internal COVID-19 management and the impact of those restrictions on our safety and wellbeing program. I am going to touch on the need and the impact this is having from a transformational change across the port. Wayne's going to provide an update on the automation safety case, and then I'm going to kind of close and lead Chas NZ into their progress review, hopefully. So if I can go the next slide, please. So the next couple of slides really are just giving you numbers. So it's a September update for the progress on the CHAS-NZ recommendations, 45 recommendations in total. 17 have been completed to date. And as you can see, we've got 25 in progress. We're kind of always working on all of them, but essentially closing them off as they are complete. The probably key areas to highlight around the priorities, the critical risk framework. When I talk to the impact, this is the one area that I'm probably a little concerned that stalled because of COVID impact. So we'll touch on that a bit more later. Fatigue management is absolutely a priority, and I'm also conscious that the Port Industry Association are working with Maritime to build a best practices guideline. So we're also contributing in how that can feed into the Ports of Auckland's fatigue management. Our underlying structure of what we need to embed is our health and safety management system, so that continues to progress and just put some basic structure and systems in place. And then we have also identified the need for a port-wide traffic management plan to specifically look at key areas of traffic concerns, mostly with our PCBU, other stakeholders. If I can go to the next slide, please. So the next slide is I wanted to just highlight, I'm conscious the last update we gave you was very much focused on the CHAS-NZ, and some of the councillors had asked, where's the detail in behind how we're doing that? So we briefly touched on the fact that we created a safety and wellbeing strategic plan for the Ports of Auckland, which actually has 84 actions in there that ultimately feed into the 45 review recommendations. So that strategic plan is still, we tend to work to the strategic plan, therefore we'll achieve the CHAS-NZ recommendations. Of that plan, we've had 38 actions completed to date with 39 in progress. Both sets of the CHAS-NZ and the strategic plan updates are provided to our staff. So we do that on a monthly basis at the start of each month, give them the update for the previous month. Now I'm going to pause and highlight just for a second if you can see the graph itself. And this is just to probably reinforce the point that we're not ticking boxes here, and I am certainly not a tick box person. I quite dislike it, to be honest. But the recommendation forecast, you can see some, and during July and August, we were actually down on what we expected to get our recommendations done. And this is just in our own strategic plan. So whilst we need to get these things done, I will certainly not progress them if we haven't achieved them, whilst keeping an eye on the CHAS-NZ recommendation timelines. So I will in another slide talk to the timeline changes, but certainly not, just making that point, certainly not ticking boxes to achieve what we need to. If I can go to the next slide, please. So I thought just putting in some words behind the numbers might be more interesting for you. The two key areas that were highlighted in the CHAS-NZ were the systems and culture. Those were the two key focus areas, a number of things behind that. But specifically wanted to pull out some areas that we're seeing, I guess, significant change in. The systems side of things, quite simply having an incident classification system drives that immediate accountability for actual and potential events. And whilst the port previously was reporting incidents and events, they weren't actually classifying them in a manner of how to manage the incident. So by simply putting in an incident classification process that determines, yes, this is a level 1, 2, 3, 4 type of event, you then get the ability to automatically apply some accountability on the type of investigation, the type of management, the type of engagement required to manage that event. So just that one little structure and system embedded in the port incident process provides a significant change. So just wanted to highlight that. It works the same with injuries. So again, if we're not consistently classifying our injuries in a certain way that meet a certain criteria, you're not going to get effective management and accountability and therefore rehabilitation in terms of injury. So we have gone back through the last 2 years worth of injuries across the Ports of Auckland and specifically reclassified them on a set of consistent criteria for that 2 years. And there isn't a huge variance, but some slight differences. Just essentially so that I could be confident in myself that if we're going to aim for an LTI reduction as an example, that I'm actually comparing apples with apples. So that's the level of detail I like to get in to give myself that assurance, so that when another injury comes in tomorrow, I'm classifying it in the exact same way that was done a year ago. So quite a bit of work to get to that state of just classifying everything so that we can now apply some specific accountability and management processes to those injuries. The next one, what we're pulling out of by having those two systems in place, is it does highlight that we've got some operational accountability gaps in terms of our frontline leaders and how they react to those types of events and injuries occurring. So we're working on some competency training for them. But also, whilst if we create a classification that determines a deeper root cause analysis of an event, we're finding that we're actually widening the scopes. So what I mean by that is when an event occurs, what I have seen in the last 6 months is that the port would, our operational managers would jump in and fix the immediate problem in terms of what occurred, but unfortunately aren't getting into that root cause analysis and fixing the underlying problems that caused it. So widening that scope and exposing that to them is quite interesting as well. So good step to have in place. So those are kind of the systems pieces. From a culture perspective, I wanted to just highlight, we're not quite seeing individual change yet. And what I mean by that is each individual worker has not quite acknowledged their role in health and safety and their obligation. And I'm generalizing that, obviously that's not all of them. But I think there's still some work in terms of once we've got the systems and structures in place, we absolutely need to be ensuring our workers have got that individual accountability as well. So we've still got some work to do there. Whilst we're engaging and talking to them and listening, etc., again, their acceptance of the accountability is the piece that we need to work on. From a consistency and accountability, if we're going to get that individual recognition, we need to see that across the board. So the frontline leaders, the managers, the exec, the board, etc., we all need to be accountable for our role in that. So, and our response to things need to be consistent across the board so that they get that trust. I can go to the next slide, please. So internally, in terms of our own COVID-19 management, we're dealing with it every day like every other business. I guess we're not every other business in terms that we're in the border worker or border industry in terms of international exposure. So we've got some additional controls. Since New Zealand was put into Alert Level 4 on the 17th of August, only staff that need to be at the port are allowed on site. And that is essentially that is our essential workers. We've got all of the operational teams in work bubbles, so work crews have been defined and those bubbles are secured in isolated areas, so bubbles do not interact with other work bubbles, and that kind of reduces that risk of transmission. And essentially if we were to get a positive case within one of those bubbles, we essentially just close that whole bubble down, or essentially stand them down, but the others can continue. All of our border workers, as at the 1st of October, have been vaccinated as required. In the stevedoring area, we had 3 staff that were redeployed who did not want to be vaccinated, but we were able to redeploy them. 3 fixed term contracts were not renewed. So again, they had chosen not to be vaccinated, but they were on fixed term contracts, so essentially just not renewed those. And then in other areas, we're working through a process with 6 individuals that are not in border workers, but are essentially still discussing their options. We've got good compliance in terms of border worker testing requirements. We're surveying our staff on vaccination at the moment, just for us to try and get an indication from the first step as to whether vaccination should be mandated or not. That's something we as an exec are discussing. What are our options there and how we intend to bring that into the port. And then we're also reviewing the options around rapid antigen testing to help reduce that spread as well. If I can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of the COVID-19 restrictions, I wanted to highlight that it was evident within the CHAS-NZ recommendations that we weren't going to be able to complete some of those due to restrictions. There were 9 identified, and I did this review in September. So we essentially pushed out those dates to November or December, depending on what the requirement was. So there was a request with individual reasoning on each recommendation put through to the exec and the board in terms of why we needed to extend the timeline on those. Ultimately, we've had 9 recommendations adjusted, and the key reasons for those are due to worker engagement and consultation. And it is something I've indicated previously that I'm quite passionate about, and I will not roll out a program just to tick a box, that we need to do these with appropriate engagement and consultation, or we will fail in these areas. So they either required that, or they needed a level of external expertise that we needed to bring in, sort of such as the human factors review. We may require further adjustment. I did this, as I mentioned, requested the extension in September, hoping we would be out of the restrictions by now, but so we may need to do further, but they'll review that again early next month. Next slide, please. I specifically put a slide in here around transformational change, and because I wanted, I guess, everyone to acknowledge that is what is required in terms of the health and safety culture and systems for the Ports of Auckland, and it is certainly what we are seeing. We've got really good worker engagement and participation, so my team and essentially the management are actively discussing health and safety, and I'm frequently getting comments on that point. We're forming trust, and trust doesn't come overnight, so we are literally, as you can see in the photo, I love doing that, but it's, having the real conversation, sitting down and going through certain areas to form that trust, but literally having to be present and available every day to be able to form that trust and know that you're going to be there the next day, when they ask their questions, and they are now asking more questions than they were 6 months ago, which is great. And it's just empowering their voices, making sure their voices are heard, and making sure they're forming that trust, that we're forming that trust. But what I wanted to highlight as well, whilst we're achieving that transformational change, the systems side of things is happening more behind the scenes. So things like the incident classification, as I mentioned, the injury classification, all of those things are kind of desktop systems and structures that we're putting in place that are not yet making an impact on the individuals on the ground. So I kind of just want to whilst we're doing some really great things and we're having conversations and we're bringing them on that journey, when we actually get to fully embed some of these programs, we will really notice the visible impact then, I believe. I'll go to the next slide, but I'm going to hand to Wayne here.
Thanks, Vanessa. I'll just make a few comments on the automation safety case, because there were some important recommendations in there in the CHASM report. This work's progressing well. We do have an overall safety system plan in draft. The what we're doing now is we're working through that plan, undertaking specific risk assessments and working through validating the safety requirements and validating them that they actually exist, they're within the system, and they're within the way we operate. There have been a few issues pop up, but we've been working through those well with our vendors, and stage, there's nothing that we've found that would indicate that this work is going to have a significant negative impact on the overall program as we work through and clear these issues with the vendors. Again, it's really important that we take our staff on this journey. So automation is now part of the conversation directly with our workforce. It's part of the agenda on the Health and Safety Committee meetings, and there's far better engagement and understanding, I think, right across the port on where we're heading. And I think it's fair to say too, a good degree of sort of acceptance that we're on a really good path as we work through this. I'll hand back to you, Vanessa.
Thanks, Wayne. If we can go to the last slide, is just in reference to the CHAS-NZ progress review, and Chris will talk to this shortly. As you're aware, we had that progress review in August, and a report has been provided for you. Look, we're really pleased with the positive comments that have come through on the achievements to date. But we also need to acknowledge that there's still a lot of work to be done. It's great to get that assurance that we are progressing in the right direction, and appreciate getting that report through from CHAS-NZ and their feedback, and just their engagement through that review as well was welcomed from the workers on the ground, from the team at the port as well. So I wanted to acknowledge that. And then just lastly, within the first CHAS-NZ independent review, when they came through, they also did a safety climate survey. And we have just this last week, so it actually ends next week, implemented that exact same survey with our staff. So 6 months following the independent review, so that we can do a comparative analysis. So we hope to provide you the results of that in the next update. So just throwing to the last slide, which was for questions.
Yep. Thank you very much, Vanessa, and thank you, Wayne, for the presentation. I'm aware, Jan, you've got to get away fairly shortly. So, look, let's just get straight into the questions. And the first question's in the name of Councillor Kathy Casey. Kathy.
Thanks, Phil. I've just got 2 questions. I enjoyed the workshop the other day, and I enjoyed your presentation today too. My first question relates to the new relationship between the ports and the Maritime Union of New Zealand. Could you just say a few things about the changes you've made to ensure that relationship will be positive into the future? My second question relates to my delight at your recording of potential events, and I wonder how you are encouraging staff to I mean, it's a real issue, isn't it? How are you encouraging staff to record these? How are you recording them and reporting them?
I'll just make a few comments initially, Vanessa, if that's okay. In regard to Maritime Union and our other unions as well, so we're taking a consistent approach across the unions. Myself and our Chief Operating Officer, Mike Lightfoot, play a key role there. So we think it's important that we develop a relationship at the senior level with those unions. So, for instance, we have contact with Craig Harrison, and we have ongoing regular meetings with Russell Main that I attend as well. In those meetings, we talk about the business, we give them a good, honest update about where we're at, the issues we're facing, and then we have a good, frank discussion, and it can be frank at times, believe me, discussion about any issues that they see. What we're finding is their input is really valuable, and it's actually adding to what we're doing. So we're building that relationship at that level as well, and I think that's, from my point of view, working well. Mike takes quite a lead in that then on a more ongoing day-to-day business, and you're involved in this, Vanessa. We do have representations on the Container Terminal Health and Safety Committee from the union. That has never happened before, and that's working well. And if we do have any incidents that require review, we bring them to the table as well, and that's really important in sort of building and sustaining the long-term trust. Can you add anything to that, Vanessa, please?
Yeah, look, so on the ground, the only other thing I'd add is that I can't talk to what was done before, but we're absolutely acknowledging the wealth and experience that come with our individuals, whether they be from the Maritime Union or their delegates or representatives within the workforce. So on the ground, absolutely having conversations daily as to these are the ideas we're thinking, what do you think? Getting their input actively, I think, is probably the key change in terms of that relationship. But again, just acknowledging the wealth of experience that comes with that. I'd be silly not to engage them, to be honest.
I'll leave the second question to you, Vanessa.
Yeah, look, so from thank you, Councillor Casey, for picking up on the potential events. It was one of the key areas I acknowledged fairly early coming into the port, is that unless an actual event occurred there wasn't really a lot of investigation or follow-up done because it was deemed nothing happened. So a focus on potential events is really, really important. And we've done a couple of sort of, I wouldn't say significant events, but potential event incident investigations. And what the business are now seeing are the benefits that are coming out of those potential investigations to get learnings in place and make sure that we can get those in place before an actual event occurs. So how we're doing that is through that classification process. So every event that now comes in gets classified actual or potential. And then as an example, I could have an actual low level event with nothing happening, but a potential very high event. So we treat the investigation based on the highest classification at all times.
I think what I just said there, Vanessa, too, as we improve our culture, what I would expect is more reporting of these events, and we strongly encourage that.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Second question is from Councillor John Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Vanessa, for your presentation. Just to follow up on that theme of labour relations, and particularly as it goes to some of the commentary you've made under leadership in this report, and how certainly that legacy has hampered matters in the past. Notwithstanding what we've heard today in terms of the ongoing contact and dialogue, is there any specific way or any way that you're anticipating in the future in which some more precise graphic illustration could be given, certainly in reporting mechanisms anyway, to that worker engagement and consultation? And I take that in the context of your comments that this isn't just a tick box exercise, and we know that trust and goodwill and stuff are a little bit intangibles, and sometimes people on one side of the fence have a different view than others on the other. So is there any kind of mechanism by which in the future we can try and give a more tangible expression to what is hopefully this growth in trust and mending of broken bridges, if I can put it that way?
I'll make a couple of comments there. I think the answer is yes. And my couple of comments is the recent survey that we've replicated that Chasm did give us, I think, a good read. Yes, it's focused on health and safety, but I think it'll give us a good read on whether we're making some progress on cultural issues as well. The other bit is we did a very fulsome engagement survey last year. It was the first one the port had done in a long time, and that has given us a high degree of base data. We will repeat that survey. We would have done it by now, but COVID has delayed it, unfortunately, because it does take quite a bit of effort on the ground to get people together to get a high completion rate. So we have pushed that out into November, and we'll just reassess whether we push that out again or we can actually do it in a COVID environment, but really keen to get a high participation rate on that. And I think once we've got that survey back, it'll give us a read on moved or not, and to what extent, and would be happy to share some of the findings from that survey once we've got it completed. Vanessa, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, look, the only additional thing I would add to that is a clear data measure you could use as participation rate. So there will be a number of things such as our health and safety committees, and that we're actually getting people turn up and participate but also contribute. So we are measuring in terms of attendance around those types of things. But we've also got a wellbeing program coming in. So again, initiatives that we roll out around health and wellbeing, we'll be measuring those participation rates as well. So I think that's probably a clear measure we could provide.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Phil, if I can just jump in here too. One of the things that the board is looking at very keenly is lead indicators, and to Vanessa's point, that does include participation rates, but it also includes things like safety walkarounds by the board and by management, and also identification of key risks being escalated up from the workforce into the reporting system. So the board will be keenly aware and keenly looking at those lead indicators that will be on the dashboard.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you to our other two answerers of those questions. So you've got no idea of how pleased councillors around this table will be that there is this sort of engagement rather than the standoff that we've had in the past. So great progress and well done. It's we're seeing some considerable improvement in that area. Last
Mr.
question.
Mayor, sorry, I just have another.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go on.
And that went to the fatigue management work that's occurring, and I think reference in the report was made to looking at other industries, and I think corrections was cited as one example. Just correct me if I'm wrong, but that sort of fatigue management analysis will be job or task specific, won't it? And the various demands of each particular job or task on the ports will have its own fatigue management lens put over it. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry, I was just giving Wayne a second to see if he wanted to jump in. So yes, absolutely. There's a couple of aspects that will need to feed into that, Councillor Watson. One is the fatigue risk management system, which is a higher level view across the port, where we would address things like hours of work policy. Those things would certainly target more specific roles and what's required in that. Probably the second part of that is that fatigue risk management system certainly will look at rosters and hours of work. But I'm obviously quite passionate as well about well-being aspects on fatigue. So alongside our fatigue risk management review, we'll be introducing our well-being piece, which is very much a role profile driven by physical and psychological health impacts. So we will certainly be bringing in things like sleep quality, nutritional, exercise, health as well into that.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore, next question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much, Jan, Wayne, Vanessa, especially for your openness of inclusiveness, and the Mayor summed that up. There is a chasm between where we were as a relationship and where we're potentially heading, so I thank you with all appreciation for that. My question is looking forward is around capability capacity of staff directly employed by the Ports of Auckland Limited and also by your stevedoring contractors to actually keep the port functioning as close to 100% as possible. A lot of industries are suffering from these deficiencies. They can't get people in, they don't exist, or they've left to go to Australia or anything else. How is the port coping in this instance?
To date, we're coping well. So I think we might have referred to this earlier in the week. We have brought some crane drivers in from offshore, and we've got some who arrive early next year and continuing to train our own people as well. And again, continuing to train straddle drivers. That has been harder in a COVID world. In regard to the entry to the port, I'm talking about stevedoring here, the container business. It tends to be at a lashing job, which is quite a hard physical job. But to date with the recruitment's gone well. We've had numbers. We run, prior to COVID, we're running workshops where people turn up in the evening, we talk to them about the job, we do some testing and then take them through a process. So I'm hesitating a little bit here. I don't see a problem in that area at this point in time. It's probably an issue for us at the moment more in some of the professional areas. The IT market is very hot, and that is very competitive out there. So if there was any issue at this point in time, it's more probably in attracting good quality people in some of the strong professional areas.
Thanks for Wayne, that's reasonably good news. Okay, cheers.
Thank you very much for that. Look, we've come to the end of questions. I'll just pause to see if there are any comments. If not, can I just thank our team from Ports very much and reiterate that obviously the relationship on the ground at the port has improved between workforce and management, but certainly there's much more confidence between your shareholder and the ports as well. And we've seen some good progress being made. We thank you for those efforts and look forward to the continued progress. Before I put the recommendations, our next item, of course, is the feedback from the Chasm's review, and you're welcome to stay online and listen to that as well. The recommendations are to receive the report and to request that we now move to quarterly updates to the CCO oversight committee as part of the normal quarterly reporting, in particular on health and safety. So I'll put that recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. Carried. And thank you very much once again to our ports team.
Thank you,
We'll
Mayor.
move straight.